Hello, I'm David Farrier. Uh, I'm an optical engineer, retired, interested in industrial archaeology in my free time, and been a member of SIA since I think about 1997 or thereabouts. So not all the way back, and not not clear 50th anniversary by any means. And I used to be a member of a local archaeology club, the Okmulgee Archaeological Society, and they were mostly interested in prehistoric, but I would drag them into the historic period every once in a while, and they seemed to not mind it too much. So what I would like to speak on today is my topic is an extant cotton gin from the Albany Agricultural Works. Hope you enjoy it. This is the cotton gin. It was cute little gin. I know you can't tell it. You can't tell any scale from this picture, but just take my word, it's cute. And it was a living history museum called Westville in Georgia. And kind of incongruous that the all metal construction suggests 20th century, but the hand crank suggests early 19th century. So I asked the museum staff about it, and they couldn't give me much information on it, so I thought I'd see what I could find on my own. And nice thing about cast items, a century later, you can still read the writing on them. So we have a company name, Emery Brothers, a brand name, Star, and a patent date. Well, patents are real easy to look up these days. And there it is. I won't go into the patent because it turned out the invention they're claiming is not real impressive. Their pride and joy in the 1850s was this horsepower. We would call it a treadmill. And in this particular example, it's operating one of their threshing machines. And I mentioned that they advertised heavily. They also advertised widely. They seem to be taking advantage of the new, there are lots of companies making farm machinery. However, there were a few that were taking advantage of the new railroad network and trying to compete nationally. And Jerry had mentioned Altman and Taylor. That was one of the direct competitors with the Albany Agricultural Works. So, getting ahead of myself. There's all sorts of twists and turns in the Agricultural Works story. Makes for quite a soap opera, and the soap opera goes on until we get somebody with some business sense. And it seems that Ezra Cornell has retired from his very successful telegraph business, and he is trying to straighten out the Emery brothers at the same time that he's trying to put his fledgling university on a solid footing. But we don't need all that information. We're interested in this one artifact. And the key thing is that some of the Emery brothers split up in 1866 and took the Star product line with them. So to have a gin that's marked Emery Brothers and Star pretty well ties it down to the middle of 1865 to sometime in 1866. And of course, I'm aware there's lots of examples, somebody buying up a foundry and changing the name of the company, but not bothering to change the casting patterns. Well, a lot of these twists and turns in this family were pretty acrimonious, and I suspect they really did modify the patterns so it really is an 1865 or 1866. Well, the other curious thing, this time period is still way too early, way too late, rather, to be having a hand gin. For a generation now, the standard practice was animal power. Remember that treadmill? And the trend was starting to be to switch to steam power. And I don't have an answer for this. The only thing I can, my first thought was this, the workmanship is really nice. Maybe this was a salesman demonstration unit. However, the company advertising disproves that it really was a serious part of a production line of large and small cotton gins. So I don't know how many they managed to sell of either the large or the small models. Their timing, the Emery family's timing was awful. They lost all of their business to the South during the Civil War, and they continued to sell and advertise up north. And then the thing that really distinguished them there were several, actually quite a few well-established companies selling cotton gins. And the thing that really distinguished the Emery family was they jumped in right after the war and started advertising heavily again. The other cotton gin manufacturers understood that their market was highly tied to the plantation system that had just been devastated, and they didn't expect to sell any cotton gins until we found out what replaced the plantation system. So the side result of this, since the Emorys were the only ones advertising in this period, they were also the only ones promoting new technologies. And the technology that they were really pushing was the condenser. So here's one of their ads. It's the same hand crank gin with a attachment on it. And to understand this, you have to understand that the cotton gin beats a whole bunch of air into the cotton, and it's really so light and fluffy that comes out of the machine, it floats, it gets everywhere. You have to gather it up and get it into the next machine, and you're breathing it in. It's really awful. So the condenser saves a little bit of labor going and finding the cotton that's been floating around, and it also makes the working conditions better. And it was first proposed thereabouts of 1850. People up in New York State were talking about it in 1850. However, so that it had been around for 10 or 15 years before the Emorys picked it up. And it was another 20 or so years, the idea caught on gradually. It seems that the people who buy cotton gins are not the same ones who work in cotton gins. And so the advantages of the condenser were not really appreciated for another 20 years. Somebody out in Texas called Robert Munger made a compelling argument why somebody who buys cotton gins ought to be getting condensers. And it was all this advertising that the Emery families was doing. Well, they also got an endorsement from, of all people, Karl Marx. And I could talk about this for the whole 15 minutes, but just let it sit that it is just totally bizarre what you can find with a web search. So anyway, it turns out Westville has one of these condensers. It was displayed, at the time, it was displayed in a different room. They had good reason for that. My understanding now is that they've built a whole new display for it, and the two items are put together. So this makes the earliest condenser that I've ever seen, and it's also the I don't know how many of them the Emerys managed to sell, but definitely their advertising was responsible for disseminating the technology. So that's my story about a cute little cotton gin. And to finish up, the family did commission some really beautiful lithographs that I do not have the rights to include in the. You don't need to type these in. I'll cut and paste these into the chat. However, it shows views of their foundry and their different wood shops and their various products. And thank you.